Hello and welcome to the show. We are still on creating a strategy for founders and SMEs, and we are looking at an SME scenario, and that's one that we've been on for a couple of days now, maybe 3, 4 days, about the catfish side hustle in Makurdi in Benue State. Now, remember that the ideas and principles that we discuss, not just on today's podcast episode, but the previous ones, they apply regardless of the city that you're in, whether you're in Makurdi, Benin City, in Port Harcourt, Geneva, wherever, and they apply whatever the product or the service you have, whether you are selling catfish or you're trying to come up with computer software. So, for those of you who are listening to the show for the first time, this is the scenario that we are using. So, we are currently a civil servant in Benue State, or we're trying to brainstorm, come up with ideas for a sales strategy for a civil servant in Benue State, in Makurdi in Benue State. And we assume that this individual is looking to supplement their income by importing catfish from Lagos and Nimbe local government in Bayelsa. And then the value add there is that they're going to roast it with traditional wood fried roasting techniques and then sell it to people in Makurdi Township. And the overriding questions that we're trying to answer in the latest set of the podcast episodes is we're trying to consider who are the kind of people that we should be targeting, which kind of distribution outlets we should be using, and what kind of intelligence or data that we can get from carrying out our plans so that we can pivot, come up with some emergent strategies and, deal with things that come up on the fly whenever we are executing our sales strategy. Because there's no strategy that is executed perfectly without coming up with some bumps and issues here and there. So, in the last episode, I believe we dealt fully with question 1. And question 1 was, who should we be targeting? And I also made mention, that's for those of you who are new to the podcast series, that in traditional sales and business development circles, this is what we call prospecting. That is where we try to figure out who might be interested in your product or service, whether they hang out online or in real life, and how we can come up with a plan for starting a conversation with them. So if you're hanging out with, modern business consulting types, the question is, who should we be targeting? If you're hanging out with sales and business development types, then the stage that we're at is called prospecting. And of course, I mentioned that it leads us to tackling questions around understanding your client, and then we looked at demographics and food preferences. So if this is your first time listening to the show, once you're done listening to this episode, skip back one more episode and you get the full update on everything that we spoke about. So what does prospecting mean? What are demographics? How do food preferences, financial preferences, all those other things? How does everything come to bear on this question? Now, I also gave the same warning at the last episode that I did at the beginning, which is that the principles that we're discussing, the principles, the tactics, the stages, they apply to every business. We are just using catfish business in Makurdi, Benue State, just to give it some context and to flesh out the ideas so that when you're coming up with running through the creative process for your own business idea, the whole process can be a lot easier. Now, question 2 in the mix was which distribution outlets that we should be using in coming up with our sales strategy. Now, remember that the answers that we will come up with can be arrived at using a common sense approach. So you really don't have to be too smart. You don't have to be an MBA. You don't have to be a postgraduate, undergraduate, whatever. You don't need a high degree of learning. Common sense is enough for us to determine whether we're going to do option A, option B, option C. The most important thing is that in executing the options and the ideas that we come up with, we have to be open to feedback so that we don't persist on the wrong path for too long. So that's how it works. So it's some common sense plus a dose of creativity. So if you're not a creative person, then sales is going to be a challenge for you, but you don't need a high IQ. So the answers don't have to be exact. The answers don't have to be correct. So if you are in the catfish space and I say something here that is not correct, yeah, that's not a problem. Ideally, if I was going to start out in this business, I would be a pro or know my onions when it comes to catfish. So the obvious answers, the obviously wrong answers would have stood out. But for now, let's just freestyle and see what ideas that we can come up with. So it's all about common sense. We're getting hunches, we're having some guesses, and then we're going to refine our results and get some feedback depending on the efforts that we put out and the results that we get. So choosing distribution channels. For those of you who listened to yesterday's episode, today's one is going to make a whole lot more sense. So option one, we're thinking restaurants and we're thinking catering outlets, and it doesn't have to be just fancy. The fancy options like Mr. Biggs and established restaurants and things like that. Okay, Mr. Biggs is more like what's it called? I think that's more like fast food. I think Mr. Biggs is called fast food. Restaurants are more. Okay, well, I'm not a foodie. I'm not a food specialist, right? But I'm sure you guys know the difference. You know what I'm trying to describe. Now, for those of you who don't know Makurdi, Benue State, it's the capital of Benue State, yes, but it's a much more provincial town. But we have some similarities with the Abuja food culture, Abuja garden culture, and Lagos. Lagos, they don't have gardens in Lagos. What do they have? Well, no, you get my point. You know those places where you go and eat, like the restaurant called the Juelegba, which is more or less an amala joint. Yeah, an amala joint. Anyway, you guys get the whole idea. So when we say restaurants and catering, I'm thinking everything. Mr. Biggs, no problem. Roadside joints, no problem. Traditional eating joints, no problem. Let's consider as many as possible. Let's think of cafes. Let's think of restaurants. Let's think of event caterers. Let's think of anybody who could offer grilled fish or smoked seafood options. Because we're just thinking, where is it possible that the patrons that we mentioned in yesterday's episode when we spoke about demographics and food preferences, where is it possible that these patrons could hang out? And these are some of the places. Now, remember what I talked about when I said common sense and creativity. It doesn't have to be exact. You might start out, and then you might figure out that maybe seafood is amongst gardens and local hangouts. Maybe it doesn't pop off, but then maybe event caterers, maybe it might work with event caterers, or maybe it might work with cafes. I mean, you never know. The bottom line is just come up with some possible ideas and then come up with a plan for executing. So week one, let's see how we can tackle cafes and restaurants in this part of Makudi, and let's see how it goes. You know, week two, we continue with cafes and restaurants if it's working, and then maybe we can start talking to event caterers. So just come up with some kind of workable plan, and then start working at it, start targeting. So start executing rather. So it doesn't matter if we make mistakes on one or two. Then there's also supermarkets and mini marts. Now I know it seems like this is kind of a stretch, but the reason why I'm adding this is because remember we're talking about common sense approach. Why I think it's a good idea to stock your catfish in stores, but that your target audience might pass through, is as because before we headed to Makurdi for the Christmas holidays, my wife found packaged dried fish in our Christmas hamper. Sorry, not dried fish, packaged catfish. Yes, packaged catfish in our Christmas hamper, and I was really surprised because well, I just didn't know you could package those sorts of things. You know, process it and have it packaged. You know, I've seen packaged suya, I've seen packaged gari, so I was shocked seeing the packaged fish. It turns out that the smoked fish was made in is it Ojota or Okota or someplace in Lagos. So it turns out that well, there actually is a market for those sorts of things. So my wife found it in our Christmas hamper, and some folks had dropped it off at the office. Of course, my wife is a fish person. I don't like fish, so she decided she was going to cook it for her, her mom, her dad, and my mom because they're all fish people. And I don't know anything about fish, but I know that everybody ate it and everybody said that it was excellent. So I guess the technology now exists for processing and fancy packaging with catfish and things like that, and you can sell it in stores. So I didn't make this up. I know that a week from now, if somebody had told me peppered wood dried catfish in supermarkets and mini marts, I would have told the person, what are you smoking? You can't do that. It's just not going to work. The traditional thing is a traditional thing. And, in supermarkets and mini marts, you only sell raw fish. But I guess the technology is there. And Yoruba boys in Lagos are already hard at the game and they figured out a way to make it work and it's now sold in supermarkets. So you might think of doing the same sort of thing in Benue State. Then, let's see. Okay, yes, delivery service. You could also try and partner up with delivery service providers, food delivery platforms, basically. Like in Abuja and in Lagos, we have Okada drivers who are in business just for picking up orders and then dropping them off. Okay, for those of you who are not native Nigerian listeners, Okada is, what will I say, motorcycles. Yes, motorcycles, but not the speed bikes, just regular motorcycles like 3 cc's, not the huge racing kind of bicycles. And then, yeah, dispatch. Okay, yeah, dispatch rider. Yeah, so dispatch riders, they go to your business, they pick it up, you pay them, you give them the end customer's address, and they send it off to the customer. So you can partner up with those sorts of people, Okada drivers, because that's their business. And for people who have grown their business up to a larger scale, there's Jumia Eats. I think it's Jumia Eats, or is it Konga Eats? Jumia and Konga, you could say that they're the Nigerian equivalent of Amazon, those online retail outlets where they sell everything. And so there's either Jumia Eats or Konga Eats, I can't remember which one. So if you're on that scale, then you can be on their platform and people can order your stuff online. Then you can do deliveries. So now you can see how, even though we're using catfish in the scenario, local processed catfish in the scenario, you can see how there can be founder or tech applications, even though we're talking about something that is local in the Nigerian sense. You would call wood dry catfish local, but you can see that yeah, it applies. So all levels of business. Then there's also pop-up stalls and events. Now this is something that I've seen in Abuja already. That's where people come and they set up a temporary stall, they set up a temporary market, a temporary booth, at markets or festivals or around office buildings. People do that to test the market and to get new customers. So in Abuja, food vendors already do that. They come with their spiced meats, different kinds of suya, grilled chicken, blah blah blah, stuff like that. So they show up at with temporary stalls at family fairs. I've even seen some at wedding fairs. I've seen some at public parks. Spaces like that. So, I mean, they're not normally there. They just show up and then it's, Mama Kelechi grilled chicken or something. And she's there with her business partner and maybe her sons, and they're grilling the chicken, hanging out to everybody, and also passing out business cards and cards and flyers and things like that. So that can be done as well. Pop-up stores and events, around Makurdi. Like we just finished the Christmas season. We're back home. We took the kids to Benue hotels. So you can have a pop-up. Speak to the management at Benue hotels. Hey, we're new. We're trying to get into the game. I hope you guys support local entrepreneurship. Can we have a store here? Blah blah blah. That sort of thing. Then there was also Bays Park or Bays Garden, where we went for a swim. I know by Abuja standards, these places I'm calling are really small and local, in quote. But hey, work with whatever it is that you have. So I'm sure you can come up with these sorts of arrangements. So you show up with your catfish, with your flyers, and the whole point of these sorts of things is you're trying to get a sense of whether there's a market. You're also trying to get some revenue because you're there and you're selling. And then it's also a good way to promote the business because you hand out business cards and you hand out flyers so that when people have weddings, events, office parties, or if they just want to buy some catfish to put at home, hopefully they have your number and they can reach out. Now, we can go on with these kinds of activities ad nauseum. You would remember that when we did this same sort of brainstorming session for Veronica, the hoodie queen, that's the lady who was part of part of my Telegram group, the lady who makes hoodies, hoodies like normal hoodies, but she makes them with Ankara. How an episode was about 45 minutes. So when it comes to brainstorming these things, we can brainstorm from now till tomorrow. So we're just going to stop here. But the point is this: I just want you guys to see that in looking at these big overarching questions when it comes to sales strategies, we can sit down with a couple of minutes and with some common sense, we can come up with some ideas about how to put together a sales strategy. And from the answers that we get, we now know what tactics and how it is that we're going to flesh it out. So sales is mostly common sense with a dash of creativity. If you're not a creative person, then I'm sorry, sales is not for you. I guess go and look for some creative person. But with common sense and a little bit of creativity, you can come up with ideas on your own for either this catfish scenario or for your particular business, whether it is tech or whether it is aquaculture or whether it is service based or whatever. So that's all for today, folks. Let's see if we can keep this under 20 minutes. So remember to connect with me on WhatsApp. The number is 080-6466-2140. The country code is +234. And remember to connect with me on LinkedIn. The name is Taveshima Ayede. I'm the host of the show. Don't worry about the spelling of my name. I know it sounds strange to most of you. You probably haven't met a native person before. In fact, there's a common joke that my wife likes to say. She says that until she met me, she just assumed that Tiv people were extinct, that we were, like maybe the original, the original African warrior type tropes that you see on TV. She thought Tiv people were extinct until she ran into me. But anyway, it's something that I understand because until I found out that some of my family friends were actually Nok, I also assumed that the Nok tribe were, extinct, and they only existed in the bronze samples that we have in British museums and American museums. So that's just part of the thing about living in Nigeria. In Nigeria, they say three major groups: Hausa, Igbo, Yoruba. But then there are loads of tribes. So there are a bunch of you who have never heard of Tiv people or met a Tiv person. And then there's some people like me who have met people who are Nok and who hang out with them, but just assume that they're Hausa. And then you find out that, what? You guys are not Hausa, you're actually Nok. So anyway, it's one of those things. So you can confirm the spelling of my name, my email address from the link where you're currently listening to this episode. So thank you very much for your time and attention. I'll catch you guys at the next episode. Oh, okay. Yeah, right on time. 20 minutes.